In the armory chamber of the Moscow Kremlin, there is a unique object that once belonged to Empress Elizabeth Petrovna. At first glance, it appears to be an artfully crafted copper globe, dated 1746. However, its true value lies not in precious metals, but in the information engraved upon it. The surface of this artifact features a world map that includes a mysterious and vast state, Great Tartary. This fact alone is intriguing, as the complexity of creating such an object, unlike a paper map, makes it incredibly difficult to forge. Amidst the splendor of imperial treasures, surrounded by gold, silver, and precious gems, this copper sphere stands almost unnoticed. It doesn't dazzle with brilliance or draw attention with lavish decoration. Its surface, covered with the noble patina of time, holds something far more valuable: encrypted knowledge. A picture of the world that radically differs from what is presented in modern history textbooks. Every line, every letter on this globe is not just a drawing made with paint, but the result of the meticulous work of a master engraver who captured the geographical and political realities of his time in metal. This method of creation makes the artifact a nearly eternal testament, one that cannot be altered or rewritten without leaving crude traces. It is this durability and complexity that forces us to pay special attention to what it depicts. If Great Tartary is shown on such a fundamental object, created for the head of one of the greatest empires, it means that for the contemporaries of Elizabeth Petrovna, this state was an undeniable reality. On the map, it appears not as a mythical land, but as a powerful nation with clearly defined borders, cities, and geographical features. This raises a question. What historical catastrophe or deliberate policy could have led to such a huge state being almost completely erased from the pages of official history, leaving behind only rare mentions on ancient maps? Adding to the mystery is the language used for all the inscriptions. It would seem that an object intended for a Russian empress should be in Russian. However, all the toponyms, the names of oceans, seas, countries, and cities, are in Latin, with occasional traces of Italian or Spanish. The Pacific Ocean is called Mare Pacificum, the Indian Ocean, Mar di India. Why was an artifact created for the Russian autocrat in the languages of Europe, and not in her native tongue? Perhaps this points to the source of knowledge used by the cartographers, or to the international nature of science at that time. But it could also be a key to understanding that the information embedded in this object was part of a broader European, rather than exclusively Russian, worldview. It is this discrepancy, this veil of mystery, that makes us peer even more closely into the tarnished copper, trying to decipher the message left to us from the depths of time. What seems like a simple globe is actually just the first layer of a much more complex and tangled puzzle. Despite its historical significance, this artifact receives almost no attention. It is placed against a wall, making a full examination impossible. Surprisingly, neither the museum's official app nor the virtual tour of the armory chamber contains any information about this object. It is like a ghost. It exists physically, but is absent from the official descriptions of the exhibition. This veil of silence only strengthens the suspicion that something more is being hidden behind the ordinary display, and that the back, the side hidden from visitors, holds the key to the puzzle. The globe, or whatever it's called in the Kremlin, stands aside, leaning against a wall, as if deliberately hidden from curious eyes. In a hall displaying crowns, scepters, and other symbols of unfading glory, this object seems like an exile. Visitors, who come to admire the magnificence and luxury, walk past it without stopping. And this is not just a curiosity, but possibly a deliberate decision. If the exhibit were displayed so that it could be walked around and viewed from all sides, it would be logical and proper from a museum standpoint. But it stands with only its front side turned to the viewer, as if hiding something on its other side, the one against the wall. The lack of official information is another, equally intriguing detail. Attempts to find information about the globe of Elizabeth Petrovna 1746 in the Moscow Kremlin's catalogs or online resources yield no results. There is no mention of it in the Visitor app, which features all the main exhibits, nor in the virtual tour, where one would expect to find a comprehensive description of every item. Even when virtually walking through the second floor and approaching its location, you can see information plaques for other display cases, but the globe is not labeled or highlighted as an object for study. It seems to exist in a kind of blind spot of the official record, which is a paradox for a museum piece of this level and from such an important historical period. Meanwhile, the attendants who guard the exhibits actively prevent any attempt at a more detailed examination. A ban on photography and requests to step away from the object are standard reactions to heightened interest. In response to all inquiries about printed materials, booklets, or books containing detailed descriptions and high-quality images of the maps, visitors receive vague references to the website where, as we've already established, there is no information. This creates an atmosphere as if the museum itself does not want to draw attention to this object, or, even more suspiciously, does not have or does not want to release full information about it. This behavior only deepens the intrigue. It is clear that behind the ordinary display lies something more than just an old globe. The true purpose of the artifact, its exact creators, and the circumstances of its appearance in the Russian Empire's treasury remain unclear. All this compels one to search for information not in official sources, but in completely external ones, to conduct a personal investigation to pull this object out of obscurity. And it is in this secrecy, this deliberate ignorance, that a clue lies. The answer to all questions, including the true nature of the object and the reason for the cartographic discrepancies, must be on that unseen side, pressed against the wall which the museum so carefully hides from prying eyes. And yet, even on the visible part, when examined with a light that helps overcome the darkening of the copper engraving, details emerge that defy simple explanation. A study of the geographical names and the arrangement of the continents reveals astonishing inconsistencies with the knowledge considered standard for the 18th century. This is not just a geographical curiosity, but a full-fledged cartographic anomaly that challenges the entire timeline of the great geographical discoveries and history. If an artifact created for an empress demonstrates knowledge decades ahead of its time, then this is no longer just a globe, but a true time machine, capturing unknown pages of the history of science and geography. This metal sphere is, in essence, a cartographic ghost, displaying knowledge that, according to official science, simply could not have existed in the mid-18th century. The most striking example is the outline of Sakhalin, labeled Ost-Saghalien. On the globe, it is unmistakably separated from the mainland by a strait. However, the history of geographical exploration of this region tells a completely different story. As late as 1805, 60 years after this globe was made, the famous navigator Ivan Krusenstern, during his circumnavigation of the world, was unable to sail around Sakhalin and prove that it was an island. Doubts remained so strong that even after Japanese expeditions in 1808 confirmed Sakhalin's island status, many European and Russian maps continued to depict it as a peninsula connected to the mainland. The final word in this long-standing dispute was put by Gennady Nevelskoy only in 1849, when he discovered the strait that would later be named after him. A logical question arises. How did the masters who created the globe for Elizabeth Petrovna in 1746 have information that became known to world science only a century later? A random guess? Or a stroke of genius? Unlikely, given the precision and complexity of making such an artifact. This is not just a cartographer's error. It is knowledge that was a whole century ahead of its time. This suggests the existence of some alternative sources of information, maps or expeditions, сведения of which have not reached us or were deliberately concealed. No less puzzling is the coordinate system used on the globe. The prime meridian, labeled in Latin as Primus Meridianus, passes through Iceland, lightly touching the eastern coast of Greenland. This choice seems extremely strange for an artifact created in St. Petersburg. By that time, a war of the meridians was already underway in the world. Every major maritime power sought to draw the zero mark through its capital or main observatory. For Great Britain, it was Greenwich. For France, Paris. In Russia, with the founding of the Pulkovo Observatory in 1839, its own Pulkovo meridian was established. But even before that, it would have been logical to expect that on a map intended for the Russian Empress, some significant object for the Russian Empire would be taken as the point of reference. The choice of Iceland deviates from this logic and indicates that the creators of the globe relied on a completely different cartographic tradition, unconnected with the British, French, or Russian scientific schools of that time. This coordinate system is another key to the puzzle, hinting at the existence of a forgotten scientific center or a lost system of knowledge about the world. These details are merely precursors to the main revelation, for if the creators of the globe knew more about geography than their contemporaries, what could they have known about the political structure of the world? And it is here, in the center of the Asian continent, that the map presents its biggest surprise. It is here, in the very heart of Eurasia, that the world map is turned upside down. Instead of the familiar vast expanses of Siberia being developed by the Russian Empire, the globe shows a colossal country whose name echoes forgotten legends. Tartaria Magna, Great Tartary, is not just a geographical term for unexplored lands. On this artifact, it appears as a full-fledged, sovereign state with clearly drawn borders. In the north, it borders the Imperium Rasiacum, with the boundary running significantly further south than we are used to seeing, leaving Tartary vast territories that are today considered part of Russia. This is a geopolitical phantom made real on copper. Its domains stretch from the coast of the Caspian Sea in the west to the shores of the Okhotsk and Japan Seas in the east. In the south, Tartary borders Persia and the Mughal Empire in India. It includes extensive territories, including the mountain systems of Tibet, and legendary cities like Samarkand, which is shown as one of the key centers of this state. This is not a wild, uninhabited land, but a civilization with a developed urban culture and an established statehood. Moreover, the map shows a complex internal structure of this giant entity. In the east, adjacent to China, is Tartaria Chinensis, or Chinese Tartary. And here we find another astonishing discovery. The Great Wall of China on this map serves its original function. It is not an internal tourist attraction, but a real state border, separating China from its powerful northern neighbor, Chinese Tartary. This completely changes our understanding of the history and purpose of this greatest of structures. The wall here is not a defense against mythical nomads, but a boundary between two civilizations. On the western flank, in the Black Sea region, lies Tartaria Minor, or Little Tartary. Its domains cover the entire Crimean Peninsula, as well as the lands around the Sea of Azov, including strategically important points like Ochakov and Perekop. This territory borders the European possessions of Turkey, making Little Tartary an important player in the complex political game of Eastern Europe. Thus, the globe of Elizabeth Petrovna paints a picture of a world in which the Russian Empire was far from the only superpower on the Eurasian continent. Alongside it existed a neighbor of equal scale and, possibly, influence. This fact calls into question the entire official interpretation of the history of the development of Siberia and the Far East. If these lands belonged to another state, then their annexation was not a peaceful colonization, but the result of a long and probably fierce confrontation, the memory of which was for some reason completely erased from the historical annals. And most importantly, this globe is not enemy propaganda, but an artifact created for the Russian Empress herself. This circumstance creates a fundamental dissonance. How could an official object belonging to a monarch depict a reality so contradictory to that presented in other documents of the same era? It is this very circumstance that turns a historical puzzle into a true paradox. We are not just looking at two different worldviews separated by centuries, but at two completely incompatible geopolitical documents created almost simultaneously, in the same city, within the same imperial system. The Atlas of the Russian Empire of 1745 was not just a collection of maps. It was an official, representative document, a product of the Academy of Sciences designed to demonstrate to the world the power, greatness, and territorial limits of the Romanov state. And on the pages of this atlas, in the very territory where Great Tartary sprawls on the globe, we see a completely different picture. There is no hint of a unified empire. Instead, there is a fragmented territory, a kind of geopolitical vacuum. The lands east of the Urals and south of Siberia are designated as part of the Chinese state, or possessions of the Karakalpaks. In essence, the official map depicts these spaces as a conglomerate of loosely connected territories under Chinese influence, or inhabited by separate peoples. It is a patchwork of small domains that does not represent a unified political or military force. Such a worldview was extremely advantageous for the Russian Empire, as it ideologically justified and rationalized further expansion to the east and south. After all, developing no man's land or bringing disparate tribes under one's rule is one thing, but waging war against a powerful empire is quite another. And then, a year later, in 1746, an object is created for the Empress's personal use that completely disavows this official version. On the desks of the same imperial officials, in the very chambers of Elizabeth Petrovna, lay two documents describing the same part of the world in completely different ways. It is impossible to attribute this to a simple mistake by cartographers or a lack of information. Rather, it points to the existence of two versions of reality, one for public consumption, for diplomats and officials, shaping the official state narrative, and another for a narrow circle of initiates, perhaps for the ruler herself, reflecting a more sober and probably more dangerous view of things. What did Empress Elizabeth Petrovna herself see when she looked at these two artifacts? Did she see in the 1745 Atlas a convenient political fiction, a map of future conquests? And in the 1746 Globe, a harsh reality, a reminder of a powerful neighbor that had to be reckoned with? This gap in the data, this coexistence of two mutually exclusive worldviews in the highest echelons of power, forces us to reconsider not only the history of one region, but the entire system of knowledge and political ideas of that time. Perhaps the globe, made in Latin and using a non-Russian coordinate system, was based on some foreign, possibly more accurate intelligence data that diverged from the official position of St. Petersburg. This was not just a map, but a secret report, cast in metal. And upon closer inspection, it becomes clear that Great Tartary is only the most noticeable, but far from the only, strangeness on this amazing map, which offers an alternative view of the entire 18th century world. Great Tartary is just the tip of the iceberg, the most prominent anomaly in a world that seems to have existed in some parallel universe. One need only look away from the center of Eurasia, and a kaleidoscope of geographical and political puzzles unfolds. Let's move to the Far East. Here, Japan is presented not as a closed island nation, as it is usually depicted during that period, but as a full-fledged continental power. The entire Korean peninsula, according to the engraving on the globe, is part of its possessions. This detail radically changes the balance of power in the region, presenting Japan as a much more aggressive and expansionist state than is commonly believed in the official history of that time. Moving further east, into the vast expanses of the Pacific Ocean, we encounter a true geographical chimera. About halfway between Asia and America, there is a large archipelago labeled Arch S. Lazari, the archipelago of St. Lazarus. This is not a solitary islet that can be dismissed as an error, but a whole scattering of islands, comparable in size to the Philippines or the Japanese islands. However, on modern maps, this archipelago does not exist. It has vanished without a trace. What is it? A mythical land like Atlantis, the belief in which persisted among cartographers of the 18th century? Or was it a real landmass, swallowed by the ocean as a result of some massive natural disaster? Its very presence on the map calls into question our understanding of the planet's geological stability. Let's cross the Pacific and find ourselves on the shores of the New World. Here, 30 years before the signing of the Declaration of Independence, there is no hint of the future birth of the United States of America. Instead, the vast territory of the East Coast is designated as New England, and to the south, the names of individual colonies are visible: Pennsylvania, Virginia. This is a world frozen in the colonial era, whose political future has not yet been determined. Mexico and a significant part of Central America are united under the name Hispaniola Nova, New Spain, emphasizing the unshakable nature of Spanish rule. The entire map of America is a mosaic of European possessions, a world without a superpower which could have followed a completely different path of development. But perhaps the most astonishing discoveries await us in Africa. The north of the continent is occupied by a vast territory called Barbary. To the south, below it, lies Terra Negrita, or the land of the Negroes. However, the most surprising thing is the depiction of the Sahara Desert. On the globe, it is not a lifeless ocean of sand at all. Its territory is significantly smaller and, most importantly, it is crisscrossed by numerous rivers and lakes, with cities marked on their banks. This image paints a picture of a much more humid and fertile climate in North Africa. This is not a desert, but a savanna, suitable for life and agriculture. Either the planet's climate in the mid-18th century was radically different, and the process of desertification was not yet so pronounced, or European knowledge of this region was so incorrect that it allowed them to draw rivers where for centuries there had only been sand. Each continent on this globe holds its own secret, its own alternative history. This is not just a map with isolated inaccuracies. It is a snapshot of a completely different reality, captured in metal. A world where giant empires exist, later erased from the maps, where ghost islands rise above the ocean, and deserts bloom. Looking at this accumulation of contradictions, one can't help but wonder, what really is this object? Perhaps it is not a map in the usual sense. Maybe its true purpose is the key that will unlock the secret of its strange content. And the answer to this question, as it turns out, has been right in front of us all along. The solution to this cascade of mysteries, it turns out, was hidden in plain sight, yet simultaneously out of reach. Behind the very surface that is so carefully hidden from visitors lies the key to the cipher. On the back of the sphere, directly beneath a relief image of the double-headed eagle, a clear and unambiguous inscription is engraved. First in Russian, in the solemn style of the 18th century, it proclaims, "To Her Imperial Majesty, the Most August Empress Elizabeth Petrovna, Autocrat of all Russia, Patroness of the Arts and Sciences. These universal sundials are presented. St. Petersburg, 1746." And below, to solidify its status and ensure clarity within the international scientific community of the time, the same text follows in Latin. This one phrase, universal sundials, turns everything on its head. This is not a globe, or rather, it is not just a globe. What we have here is not a static model of the planet intended for studying geography, but a highly complex and, for its era, high-tech instrument. It is a dynamic machine, an astronomical calculator designed to determine the time by the sun at any point in the world, and possibly to solve other navigational and astronomical problems. And in light of this discovery, all the previously incomprehensible details instantly make sense. The complex system of brass rings, axes, and discs that seemed like excessive decoration turns out to be a functional part of the mechanism. The scales with divisions from 0 to 360 degrees and Roman numerals from 1 to 12 on the equatorial ring and side discs are not decor, but precision measuring instruments for counting hours, minutes, and possibly months or zodiac signs. The axes, with the mysterious names horizontis, horizon, and circulus crepusculorum, twilight circle, are nothing other than movable elements for modeling the horizon line and calculating the time of sunrise, sunset, and the duration of twilight for any given latitude. The unnatural tilt of the sphere in the display case is likely just one of the many working positions in which it could be set to perform calculations. But this revelation gives rise to an even deeper and more troubling mystery. If we are dealing not just with a map, but with a precision scientific instrument, then the requirements for the accuracy of that map increase exponentially. This is no longer an artistic depiction that allows for liberties. Every line, every continent, every island on this copper sphere is a fundamental database on which the instrument performs its calculations. An error in geographical coordinates or the outlines of continents would render the sundial completely inoperable. And this means that for the creators of this instrument, scientists, engineers, and cartographers of the highest qualification, Great Tartary was not a myth, but an objective geographical and political reality. The island status of Sakhalin was not a guess for them, but a firm fact. The archipelago of St. Lazarus existed, and the Sahara Desert was crisscrossed with rivers. These anomalies were an integral part of the scientific worldview upon which the operation of this complex device was based. The artifact from the armory chamber is not just an alternative map. It is material proof of the existence of an alternative science, technology, and possibly even an alternative physics of the world, knowledge of which was, for some reason, lost or hidden. And now the main question changes its formulation. It is no longer, what is this object, but why is its true nature so carefully concealed? A simple explanation, like an error or oversight by museum staff, is inappropriate here. An exhibition of this level is thought out to the smallest detail. The decision to call a highly complex astronomical instrument a globe, to remove all information about it from catalogs, and to physically turn it so as to hide the dedicatory and explanatory inscription, is not an accident, but a deliberate action. It is an act of informational concealment, carried out at the highest level. Aversion arises that the issue lies precisely in the connection between the instrument and the map engraved on it. To recognize this object as a universal sundial is to admit that it was created to work for precise calculations, and to admit its functionality is to automatically recognize the accuracy of the map that serves as its basis. This would mean admitting that in 1746, Russian science and cartography operated with data according to which Great Tartary was a reality, Sakhalin was an island, and the Sahara was a blooming savanna. Such a conclusion undermines not just individual historical facts, but the very foundations of the historical paradigm that has been built up over centuries. It is much easier and safer to present this artifact as a primitive and inaccurate globe, a curiosity of antiquity, rather than as a working instrument that challenges all of modern science. Concealing the true purpose of the artifact allows its content to be devalued. If it is just a globe, then all its cartographic oddities can be written off as the errors and delusions of ancient masters. But if it is a precise scientific instrument, then these oddities turn into irrefutable facts from an alternative, erased history. The history of this object inevitably leads us to the figure of its possible creator, the master Isaac Bruckner, who made similar complex mechanisms for Elizabeth's predecessor, Empress Anna Yoanovna. It is interesting that earlier device was made entirely in Russian, which makes the Latin on Elizabeth's globe even more mysterious. The figure of Bruckner himself and his school of masters is also shrouded in mystery. Where did they get their knowledge? What sources did they rely on when creating their incredible instruments? Their works testify to the existence in 18th century Russia of a powerful scientific and technological potential that, it seems, was subsequently either forgotten or deliberately consigned to oblivion. Thus, the artifact from the armory chamber is not just a mystery, it is a piece of evidence. Evidence in the case of the greatest historical falsification. It testifies not only to the existence of a vanished empire, but also to a lost level of scientific knowledge. The concealment of its true nature is an attempt to hide the very fact of the existence of another history, another world where geography, politics, and even climate were different. The copper sphere, modestly standing by the wall, ceases to be just a museum exhibit. It becomes a silent witness that holds the key to one of the greatest mysteries of our past. And the main question it leaves behind is not what exactly was hidden from us, but why it was done.